Welcome to my channel, folks. I'm Nancy Miller, your storyteller spinning tales of old American folklore, unsolved mysteries, and all sorts of wild adventures. Today, I've got a real humdinger for you, a story that takes us back to the days after the Civil War, in a little corner of Missouri called Weaver County. So grab a seat, and let's dive into today's tale. This story kicks off in Weaver County, a quiet spot near Springfield, Missouri, back in the 1870s. Picture this. A young couple barely starting out, living a simple life in a town surrounded by rolling fields. The man's name was Thomas "Tom" Shepard, a book-smart fella who'd made a name for himself early on. At just 15, he'd aced the county school exams, earning himself a reputation as the local whiz kid. His wife, Clara Shepard, was a beauty with brains to match. She came from humble roots, but you'd never know it. She carried herself with grace and had a sharp mind that could keep up with anyone. Now, the Shepard family wasn't rolling in dough, but they weren't scraping by either. Tom's folks had left him a decent chunk of land, about 100 acres of good Missouri soil. They rented it out to tenant farmers, pulling in enough cash each year to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. Plus, Tom's smarts gave him a leg up. He'd landed a clerk job at the county courthouse, which came with perks like tax breaks. All in all, life for this young couple was pretty darn comfortable. Tom and Clara had been hitched for just over a year, and they got along like peas and carrots. No kids yet, mind you, but that didn't seem to bother them much. Things were uneventful, almost too quiet, you might say. But that second year of marriage? That's when things started to shift. Tom was a hard worker, always burning the midnight oil at his desk, poring over law books and ledgers. He had big dreams, maybe even running for county judge someday. Clara, bless her heart, understood. A man with ambition wasn't a bad thing, right? So she took care of him, cooked his meals, kept the house warm, even sharpened his pencils late at night. She made sure he didn't have to lift a finger outside of his work. Mornings and evenings, they'd sit together, Tom reading aloud from some old novel while Clara darned socks or stitched a quilt. It was a simple life, sweet as honey, just the two of them in their little farmhouse. But if there's one thing I've learned telling these stories, it's that calm waters don't last forever. Trouble was brewing, and it was about to crash down like a Missouri thunderstorm. Now, life wasn't all sunshine and roses for Tom and Clara Shepard, even with their cozy setup. See, trouble started stirring when Clara got word from her folks back home. One morning, a scruffy farmhand showed up at their doorstep, hat in hand, with a message from Clara's family. He said her ma, Esther Johnson, was down sick, real bad, and they were hoping Clara could make the trip back to see her. When Clara heard that, she couldn't sit still. She rushed to Tom, worry etched all over her face, and told him the news. Tom didn't hesitate. Ma-in-law being sick? That was serious business. He darted out to the henhouse, nabbed a fat chicken, and hightailed it to the general store for a tin of sugar cookies, something nice to bring along. They packed up quick, ready to head out together to check on Esther. It wasn't a long trek. Her folks lived just shy of 10 miles away, over in Benton Hollow, a little speck of a place nestled in the hills. But here's the thing, Clara wasn't exactly itching to go back home, and for good reason. Clara's family, the Johnsons, weren't what you'd call warm and welcoming, at least not to her. She had a younger brother, Charlie Johnson, who was the apple of her parents' eye. Esther and her husband, Amos, doted on that boy like he was the second coming. There's an old saying round these parts, spare the rod, spoil the child. Well, they didn't just spare it, they tossed it out the window. Charlie grew up wild, couldn't read worth a lick, couldn't hold a job, and at 18, he still hadn't settled down. All he did was loaf around, stirring up trouble and mooching off the family. Every time Clara visited, it was the same old song and dance. Her folks wouldn't ask how she was holding up, or if Tom treated her right. Nope. The minute she walked in, it was all about Charlie. When's your brother gonna find a wife, Clara? You ought to help him out. He's fixing to get married soon. Don't you think you could spare a few dollars? He's your kin, after all. On and on they'd go, jabbering about that no-good brother of hers like he was some kind of prince. As for Clara, their own daughter? Barely a howdy-do. It stung deep, anyone with a heart could see that. Over time, she'd started dreading those trips back to Benton Hollow. But this time was different. Her ma was sick, and blood's thicker than water. How could she not go? So despite the knot in her gut, Clara hitched up her skirts, and she and Tom set off for her folks' place, chicken and cookies in tow. Meanwhile, back at the farmhouse, Tom couldn't shake a bad feeling once Clara was gone. 2 days passed, and he couldn't focus on his books or his clerk work. He'd pace the floorboards, muttering to himself. She said 3 days at most, he'd think. Why ain't she back yet? What if Esther's taken a turn for the worse? 4 days in, Tom was climbing the walls. He couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed a few bucks from the tin under the bed, figuring he'd head to Benton Hollow himself and see what was what. Maybe Clara needed him, or maybe something worse had happened. Either way, he wasn't about to sit idle. But just as he stepped into the yard, boots crunching on the gravel, there came a knock at the door, a sharp rap that stopped him cold. He swung it open, and there stood a stranger, a wiry fella in a dusty coat, tipping his hat real polite-like. "Beg your pardon," the man said, "but is this Thomas Shepard's place?" "The clerk from Weaver County." "That's me," Tom replied, squinting at him. "Who are you, and what's your business?" The stranger gave a thin smile. "Name's Eli Grayson. I run Grayson's funeral parlor out in East Springfield. I'm here about a bill that needs settling. Wonderin' when you might be able to square it up." Tom's brow furrowed. A funeral parlor? At his door, first thing in the morning? That was bad luck if he ever heard it. "Settle what bill?" he snapped, irritation creeping in. "I don't reckon we've got any business, you and me." Eli didn't flinch. "Oh, it's business all right. Your missus passed on, didn't she? Day before yesterday, you ordered a coffin and some burial goods from my shop. Everything's already been sent over to the Johnson place in Benton Hollow. Your brother-in-law, Charlie, told me to come collect from you. Got his signature right here on the receipt. Take a look if you please." He handed over a crumpled paper, and sure enough there it was, a bill for a pine coffin, a shroud and a headstone, all signed off with Charlie Johnson's sloppy scrawl. Tom stared at it, his mind racing. What in tarnation was going on? Tom Shepard stood there in his yard, the receipt from Grayson's funeral parlor trembling in his hand. His head was spinning like a top. "Clara? Dead," he muttered, half to himself. He glared at Eli Grayson, the undertaker, who just shrugged like it was another day at the office. "You're telling me my wife's gone, and I'm only hearing it now? What kind of mix-up is this?" Eli scratched his chin. "No mix-up, far as I know. Charlie Johnson came by my shop yesterday, said his sister passed, and you'd foot the bill. I delivered the goods to Benton Hollow myself. Coffin, shroud, the works. Ain't my job to ask questions, just to get paid." Tom's frown deepened. "Hold on now. You said my wife died. Clara's my wife, not my ma-in-law. Esther's the one who was sick. You sure you got this straight?" Eli blinked, then pulled his hat down a touch. "Well, shoot. Charlie said it was his sister, Clara Shepard. I figured that's who went. Didn't mention no ma. But the old lady at the Johnson place, Esther you say? She was up and kicking when I dropped off the coffin. It's Clara they're burying, not her." The words hit Tom like a mule kick to the chest. His knees buckled, and he grabbed the porch rail to steady himself. "Clara, dead? Yesterday." His voice cracked. "That can't be right. She was fine when she left 4 days ago." Tears welled up, but he shook his head, fighting them back. He thrust the receipt at Eli, digging a few crumpled bills from his pocket. "Take your damn money and get off my land. I gotta see this for myself." Eli pocketed the cash with a nod. "Sorry for your loss, Mr. Shepard. Hope you sort it out." He tipped his hat and shuffled off, leaving Tom alone with a storm brewing in his gut. No time to waste. He grabbed his coat and bolted for Benton Hollow, legs pumping like a man possessed. 10 miles felt like 10 lifetimes, his mind racing faster than his feet. "Clara, Gone? How? Why didn't they send word?" By the time he burst through the Johnsons' rickety gate, sweat and dust caked his face. The yard was quiet, too quiet, except for a plain wooden awning set up near the barn. Under it sat a black-stained coffin, gleaming in the midday sun like some grim omen. Charlie Johnson spotted him first, ambling over with red-rimmed eyes and a fake sob. "Tom. Oh, Tom, you're too late. She's gone. My sister's gone." I didn't even get to say goodbye proper. Tears streamed down his face, but something about it felt off, like a bad actor hamming it up. Tom shoved past him, heart pounding, and threw himself at the coffin.
Clara. Darling. No.
He pounded the lid, hollering her name till his voice gave out. 3 gut-wrenching cries later, the world spun, and he hit the dirt, out cold from the sheer weight of it all. When he came to, he was sprawled on a lumpy cot inside the Johnson house. Esther and Amos, his in-laws, hovered over him, their gray hair wild and eyes swollen from crying. Esther clutched a handkerchief, choking out, "My poor girl, my baby," before dissolving into sobs again. Amos just stared at the floor, silent as a stone. Tom struggled up, tears streaming as he gripped Esther's arm. "What happened?" "Clara was fine when she left me. She's young, healthy. How'd she die? Tell me." Esther wailed louder, smacking her chest. "It's my fault, all mine. I never should have called her back." Between hiccups, she spilled the story. "Few days back, I got these awful headaches. Kept dreamin' of Clara at night, thought maybe I was missin' her too much. So I sent word for her to come home. She got here and for 2 days she was a saint, cooked me chicken soup, fussed over me. But then day before yesterday, she said her chest hurt somethin' fierce. We figured she'd just overdone it, told her to lie down. By afternoon, she was gaspin', couldn't catch her breath. I sent Charlie for the doc, but before he even got back, she was gone. Just gone." Amos nodded grimly, still mute. Tom wiped his face, suspicion gnawing at him.
"Chest pains?"
"She never had no heart trouble. Not once. How's that come on so sudden?" He wanted to press harder, but Esther cut in, voice shaking. "She had it as a kid, Tom. Spells of it, years back. We thought she'd outgrown it, never flared up since she was little. Who'd have thought it'd take her now?" Tom opened his mouth, then shut it. What could he say to that?
"Allrecht, Herr Raspet."
"What now?" Esther sniffled. "We're giving her a proper burial tomorrow." "Oh Lord, why'd it have to be my girl?"
"Weithert Fuchsburien, the young. It ain't right."
The room filled with their sobs, and Tom stumbled out to the yard, numb and restless. That night, while the Johnsons slept, he kept vigil by the coffin, tears dripping onto the wood as he replayed every moment with Clara. Around midnight, Charlie offered to take over, shooing him to bed. Tom lay down, but sleep wouldn't come, her face danced behind his eyelids. Then in a haze he saw her, Clara, standing by the bed, smiling soft-like before plunging a kitchen knife into her own chest. "Clara!" he yelled, lunging for her, only to tumble off the cot and hit the floor hard. It was just a dream, but the fall was real. Gasping, he lit a candle and froze. Under the bed, tucked in the shadows, was a pile of clothes, Clara's blouse and skirt from the day she left, paired with her embroidered Sunday shoes. He yanked them out, heart racing, and that's when he saw it. The blouse was splotched with dark rusty stains. Blut. Tom Shepard sat there on the floor of the Johnson house, candlelight flickering over the blood-stained blouse in his hands. His breath hitched as he traced the dark patches. Too much blood for a nosebleed, too wrong for anything natural. That dream of Clara stabbing herself flashed back, chilling him to the bone. "She's trying to tell me something," he whispered, clutching the clothes tighter.
"This ain't no hard trouble. Somebody hurt her."
He bundled the blouse and shoes together, determination hardening his jaw. Storming out to the yard, he found Charlie Johnson slouched by the coffin, whittling a stick like nothing was wrong. Tom thrust the bloody fabric in his face, voice low and dangerous.
"Charlie, you better start talking."
"How'd Clara die? And don't feed me no hogwash. Why's her blouse covered in blood?" Charlie's knife froze mid-cut, his eyes darting like a trapped critter. I don't know nothing about that, Tom," he stammered, scrambling back.
"She got sick, Tarzal.
Doc couldn't do nothing." But the words tripped over themselves, and he dropped to his knees, bawling. "Please, Tom, don't ask me no more. I can't, I just can't." Over and over he begged, a broken record of tears and nonsense. Tom's patience snapped.
"You want talk?
Fine.
I'll let the law sort it out."
He spun on his heel and marched off, the bloody bundle tucked under his arm, heading straight for the Weaver County Courthouse 10 miles away. His mind churned the whole way. Charlie's panic, Esther's story, that dream. It all stank worse than a skunk in a henhouse. Her folks might be in on it too, he thought grimly. But I'll be damned if I let this slide. By dawn, he stumbled into Weaver County, boots muddy and eyes wild. The courthouse was just waking up, and the deputy at the gate perked up when he saw Tom, a local clerk with a reputation, charging in like a bull. "Trouble, Shepherd?" the deputy asked, eyeing the bundle. "Murder," Tom spat, holding up the blouse. "My wife's dead, and this proves it wasn't natural."
I want the sheriff on this, now.
The deputy didn't dawdle, hustling inside to fetch Sheriff Zebulon "Zeb" Carter, a grizzled lawman from Tennessee who'd settled in Missouri after the war. Zeb was still wiping sleep from his eyes when he met Tom in the office, but the sight of the bloodstains jolted him awake. "All right, Shepherd, walk me through it," Zeb said, pouring coffee he wouldn't drink. Tom laid it out: Clara's trip, the undertaker's visit, Charlie's dodge, and now the bloody clothes. Zeb rubbed his beard, studying the blouse. "This here's evidence, no doubt. That dream of yours, though, that's just your head playin' tricks."
Kent hanga case on ghosts. Tell you what, I'll ride out to Benton Hollow with you.
"We'll get to the bottom of this." They saddled up, Zeb barking orders to a couple of deputies, and by mid-morning, they rolled into the Johnsons' yard. Esther, Amos, and Charlie were all there, looking like they'd seen a ghost when Zeb's badge glinted in the sun. Word had spread fast. Someone had tipped them off about Tom's courthouse run. Esther flew into a rage, hobbling forward with a finger jabbed at the sky.
Wo's lodon snake spreadin, Lies?
"My girl died of sickness, and that's the end of it. She's gone. Why can't y'all let her rest?" Tom stepped out from behind Zeb, holding up the bloody blouse.
"I'm the one killin' it, Esther."
"Explain this. How'd Clara's clothes end up like this if she just took sick? I want to know how she died, really died." Esther's face crumpled, but she rallied quick.
"Oh, Tom, I know you're hurt, son.
"Losin' her's torn us all up. That blood? She coughed it up when she passed. Poor thing was chokin' on it. Happens sometimes with bad hearts. You think she was stabbed? Look close, ain't no knife holes in that fabric."
"Go on, check it yourself."
Tom hesitated, then spread the blouse out on the ground, running his fingers over every inch. He checked once, twice, 3 times. No cuts, no tears, just blood soaked into the weave. It threw him off, but doubt still gnawed. "Somethin' ain't right," he muttered, turning to Zeb. "Sheriff, I want that coffin opened. I need to see her body." Before Zeb could answer, Esther's face went white as a sheet, then red with fury. "You devil!" she screeched, planting herself in front of the coffin.
"Ain't nobody to sheen my girl's grave. You wanna dich her ab? Over my dead body. I'll fight you tooth and nail."
She threw herself at Tom, fists swinging, landing a couple of sharp slaps across his face.
"Get out, you monster. I never wanna see you again."
She kept coming, wild as a banshee, until she rammed her head into his chest. A loud thud, and she crumpled to the ground, out cold. Charlie rushed to her side, hollering, while Amos lunged at Tom, fists up like he'd take on the world. The yard erupted into chaos, shouting, shoving, a full-on ruckus, while Zeb stood back, arms crossed, watching it all unfold with a hawk's eye. The Johnson yard was a mess. Esther sprawled out cold, Amos swinging at Tom like a cornered bear, and Charlie wailing over his ma. Sheriff Zeb Carter finally had enough. "Everybody shut it," he bellowed, voice cutting through the racket like a gunshot. The scuffle froze, all eyes on him. He pointed at his deputies. "You too, grab Shepherd. He's making wild claims with no proof. Haul him back to the courthouse till we sort this mess." The deputies hesitated. Tom was one of their own, a clerk they'd swapped stories with over coffee, but Zeb's glare got them moving. They latched onto Tom's arms, dragging him off as he shouted, "This ain't over, Zeb. I'll prove it." Esther stirred awake just in time to see him go, her face twisting with relief as the sheriff's posse disappeared down the road. She, Amos, and Charlie exchanged a look, letting out shaky breaths like they'd dodged a bullet. By afternoon, the Johnsons rallied for Clara's burial. 6 hired hands from town hefted the coffin onto their shoulders, grunting under the weight as they trudged along a rocky trail toward the family plot up in the hills. Sweat beaded on their foreheads, and they muttered amongst themselves. "Ain't this thing awful heavy for a gal?" one griped. "Feels like we're haulin' a steer, not a lady." They pressed on, legs wobbling, the coffin swaying like a drunk on Saturday night. Then, out of nowhere, Tom came tearing down the path, eyes wild and voice raw. "Clara. Darlin', let me see you one last time." He'd slipped the deputies back at the courthouse, busted loose and run the whole way back. The pallbearers froze, too stunned to dodge, and Tom crashed into the coffin like a runaway train. The men stumbled, boots slipping on loose gravel, and with a sickening crack, the whole load pitched over the edge of a ravine beside the trail. Down it went, tumbling end over end, splintering against rocks, till it busted wide open at the bottom. Charlie, trailing the procession, went pale as ash. The pallbearers gaped, jaws slack, as they peered into the gulch. There, amid the wreckage, weren't one body, but two. One was Clara, no doubt, her Sunday dress torn but recognizable. The other? A big fellow with a bulldog face, his head bashed in and blood crusted thick. The crowd erupted. "That's Big Jim Carver," one hollered. "The saloon owner from Weaver. What's he doing in there?" Word spread like wildfire, and soon enough, Sheriff Zeb rode up with a posse, summoned by a frantic townsfolk. The Johnsons, Esther, Amos, and Charlie, were hauled before him, kneeling in the dirt under the hot sun. Tom stood off to the side, free for now on account of his courthouse status, staring daggers at them. A wiry man in a butler's vest, Jim Carver's barkeep, knelt beside the Johnsons, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Zeb paced, hands on his hips. "All right, let's hear it. Two bodies, both dead unnatural. Clara's got a stab wound clean through her chest, and Big Jim's skull's caved in from behind, blunt as a hammer. Died same night, near as I can reckon. What's the story here?" Big Jim Carver, it turned out, was a local heavyweight, ran the best saloon in Weaver County, owned a pawnshop on the side, and had a wife plus a gaggle of mistresses. He'd been missing 2 days, but nobody batted an eye. His women figured he was shacked up somewhere, too busy squabbling over his cash to care. The barkeep had finally gone to the sheriff when the squabbling hit a fever pitch, but by then, Jim was already cold in that coffin. Zeb turned to the Johnsons, eyes narrow. "Why'd you stash him in there? Thought you'd sneak this past me." He'd played it smart, letting Tom stir the pot, knowing the burial might crack the case wide open. If he'd been wrong, he could have called it an accident and smoothed things over. But now? 2 corpses said he'd hit the jackpot. He slammed his fist on a makeshift table, glaring at Charlie. "Drag him over here, 20 lashes, and don't hold back." The deputies wrestled Charlie down, and soon the air filled with the crack of a whip and his howls. Esther lurched forward, sobbing, "My boy. Stop it, Sheriff, you can't do this." Zeb spun on her, voice cold as steel. "Pipe down, woman, or you're next." He nodded to a deputy, who backhanded her hard. Blood trickled from her lip, a tooth clattering to the dirt. The crowd went dead silent. Zeb leaned in, smirking. "Y'all think you can lawyer your way out of this? I ain't a skin polite like, 'cause you'll just lie through your teeth. So we'll skip the chit-chat and go straight to the convincin'. Who's talking first, or do I keep the whip swingin'?" Charlie, sprawled and whimpering, couldn't take it. Esther, clutching her face, broke. "No more, Sheriff. I'll tell it all, don't hurt my boy no more." And with that, the dam burst, spilling a tale darker than a moonless night. Esther Johnson crumpled in the dirt, blood dripping from her busted lip, her voice a ragged whisper as Sheriff Zeb Carter loomed over her. "All right, I'll talk," she croaked, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "Just leave my Charlie be." The crowd leaned in, hushed, as she spilled the whole ugly tale, Tom Shepard standing rigid, fists clenched, soaking in every word. It started with the Johnsons' rotten luck. Esther and Amos had always favored Charlie, their only son, spoiling him rotten while Clara got scraps of their affection. But Charlie was a leech, couldn't hold a job, couldn't stay out of trouble. A few weeks back, he'd taken to gambling at Big Jim Carver's saloon, racking up a debt he couldn't pay. Jim, a hard man with a mean streak, wasn't about to let it slide. He cornered Charlie one night and made an offer, "Get me your sister for a couple nights, and we'll call it square." Charlie, spineless as ever, ran home to his folks with the deal. And here's the kicker, Esther and Amos said yes. They cooked up a lie about Esther being sick, sent a farmhand to fetch Clara, and waited. For 2 days, she nursed her ma, oblivious, while they plotted. Big Jim wanted her, and they figured they'd wash their hands of the debt. When Clara wouldn't bend, too decent, too stubborn, they brought Jim to the house under cover of night, planning to let him take what he wanted by force. That night, Clara woke to a stranger in her room. She screamed for help, but her family just stood outside, listening like it was nothing. Desperate, she grabbed a pair of sewing shears from her sewing kit and swung wild. Jim laughed it off at first. Big man like him wasn't scared of a little gal. But Clara wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting to die clean. With a cry, she drove the shears into her own throat, blood gushing over her blouse as she collapsed. Jim froze, then bolted, cursing under his breath. The Johnsons rushed in, found her dead, and panicked. Jim was still a problem. He'd talk, and they'd hang for it. So they grabbed a shovel handle and chased him down in the yard, smashing his skull till he stopped twitching. 2 bodies, one big mess. Esther, cold as ice, told Charlie to hit up the funeral parlor at dawn, stuff both corpses in one coffin, and pin it on Clara's sickness. They tapped Tom to pay, figuring he'd be too broke up to ask questions. That's how Eli Grayson ended up at his door. Esther's voice broke as she finished. We didn't mean for it to go so far, but Charlie's our boy, Tom lunged, roaring. You sold her out. My Clara. Deputies held him back as he thrashed, tears streaming. God almighty, why'd she have to be born to you snakes? Zeb stepped in, voice steady. Easy, shepherd. These 3 ain't worth your fists. They'll face the gallows for this. Clara's gone, and they dragged Big Jim down with her. Justice'll sort him out. He didn't say how, didn't need to. The Johnsons were hauled off in irons, Charlie sniveling, Esther moaning, Amos silent as a tomb. Murder and conspiracy don't get pardons in Weaver County. Tom staggered home, a shell of himself. He scraped together cash for a new coffin, pine simple, the way Clara would have liked, and buried her proper in the churchyard. After that, he drowned his days in whiskey, the bottle his only friend. One night, drunk and dreaming, he felt a soft hand on his cheek. He blinked awake, and there she was, Clara, glowing like an angel, her voice a whisper. Tom, pull yourself together. You've got a life to live. I'm waitin' for you to make me proud. Come morning, he woke with a soaked pillow and a fire in his chest. Her words stuck. He tossed the bottle, dusted off his law books, and got back to work. The dead were gone, the living had to keep going. Life rolled on, slow and steady, in Weaver County. And that's the end of our first tale, folks. Stick around, Nancy Miller's got another yarn to spin. Next up, the gold heist of Jericho Flats. Picture this, a dusty Kansas town, a flood, and $1,000 in gold snatched from under the law's nose. A statue in the town square's got secrets, better keep its mouth shut. Don't miss it. Howdy again, folks. Nancy Miller here, back with another rip-roaring tale from the wild heart of America. If you liked that last one, buckle up, this one's a doozy. We're heading to Jericho Flats, Kansas, in the summer of 1883. It's a dusty little town on the edge of nowhere, and it's about to get shook up by a crime that'll rattle the whole state. Let's set the scene. Picture this, Jericho Flats, smack in the middle of the plains, baking under a relentless sun. For 20 straight days, the skies opened up, dumping rain like Noah's flood. The Cottonwood River burst its banks, swallowing farms and turning good land into a muddy swamp. Word got to Washington, and the government, still licking its wounds from the war, wired a relief fund, $1,000 in gold coin, meant to patch up the town. A squad of U.S. Marshals was tasked with hauling it from Topeka, 15 miles out from Jericho Flats. But here's where it goes sideways. Halfway there, on a lonesome stretch of the Santa Fe Trail, bandits hit. The Marshals didn't stand a chance. 15 men cut down, their blood mixing with the rain-soaked earth. The gold? Vanished, like smoke in the wind. News tore through Kansas, hit Topeka, then shot up the telegraph lines to D.C. President Chester A. Arthur got wind of it and damn near busted a vein. Solve this in 7 days, he wired, or heads roll. The order landed in Kansas City, at the desk of the U.S. Marshal Service's top dog, Joseph Joe Baxter. Joe was a legend, 6 feet of grit and steel, with a stare that could stop a charging bull. He'd tracked outlaws from Missouri to Montana, always with his trusty iron ruler strapped to his belt, a foot-long slab of metal he'd used to crack more skulls than a saloon brawl. Rain or shine, he got the job done. That day, soaked to the bone in his oilskin coat, he didn't blink at the president's deadline. He rounded up 5 of his best deputies, saddled their horses, and tore out of Kansas City, hellbent for Jericho Flats. By the time Joe and his crew thundered into town, the rain was still pounding, turning streets into rivers of muck. The local sheriff, Luke Tanner, met them at the edge of the crime scene, a busted bridge over Cottonwood Creek, where the marshals had made their last stand. Luke, a wiry fellow with a droopy mustache, tipped his hat, water streaming off the brim. "Glad you're here, Baxter," he hollered over the storm. "Been 10 hours since the ambush. We've locked down the town, roads, gates, everything. No sign of that gold yet." Joe swiped rain from his face, squinting at the bridge. "Where's the bodies?" "County jail," Luke replied, voice tight. "All 15 marshals, torn up bad. Bandits took their guns, left 'em for dead. We've scoured 10 miles round, but this rain's washed out every damn track, hoofprints, wagon ruts, you name it." Joe's jaw tightened. $1,000 in gold wasn't light. Those bandits couldn't have gone far lugging it. "What's nearby?" he asked, scanning the horizon. "Any hideouts?" Luke ticked off the options. "North's the town gate, 2 guarded to slip through. West, there's an old trapper's shack, just a broke-down codger watching it. East, 10 miles out, sits the Jericho Mission, 3 preachers run it, quiet types. South's the main road, busy with traders even in this mess." He shrugged. "Check-a-dingo. Old man ain't seen nothin', preachers swear they've been prayin', and the road's too crowded for a clean getaway." Joe frowned, the gears turning. No witnesses, no tracks, and a ticking clock, 6 days left to crack it. He glanced at his deputies, their faces grim under dripping hats. "All right, Luke, let's head to the jail. I want to see them bodies myself." But before they could move, a deputy splashed up, panting. "Sheriff Baxter. Trouble back in town. 2 more dead at the saloon. Found $50 in gold on one of them, matches the relief stash." Joe's eyes narrowed. Rain hammered down, but a spark lit in his gut. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Looks like our bandits ain't as smart as they think." The hunt was on. Joe Baxter and his crew slogged through the muddy streets of Jericho Flats, the rain beating a relentless tattoo on their hats. The news of 2 dead men at the Dusty Rose Saloon had lit a fire under them, and they rode hard to the scene. Sheriff Luke Tanner trailed close, his face pinched with worry. This was his town, and it was unraveling fast. The saloon was a sorry sight, its usual rowdy cheer drowned out by the storm and the stink of death. Inside, the owner, Frank Dawson, leaned on the bar, staring at the floor like it owed him money. A scrawny kid, Billy, the saloon's errand boy, yawned by the stairs, looking half dead himself from the chaos. Joe strode up to Frank, flashing his marshal's badge. "Heard you got trouble. 2 bodies and some gold. Spill it." Frank straightened, his paunch quivering like jelly. "Yes, sir, Marshal Baxter. Ain't never seen nothin' like this. 2 fellas holed up in a room upstairs, drifters, I reckon. Ordered whiskey and steak, the good stuff, and told Billy to keep it comin'. Next thing I know, there's hollerin' and crashin'. Billy went to check, and by the time he got there, they was both dead, arrows through their necks clean and quick." Joe's brow shot up. "Arrows." He glanced at Luke, who nodded grimly. "Found $50 in gold coin on one of them," Luke added. "U.S. mint stamp, same as the relief haul. No mistakin' it, government gold don't float round regular folks." "Anything else?" Joe pressed, leaning in. Frank scratched his head. "Well, their clothes was a mess, looked like somebody rifled through 'em. Maybe lookin' for more gold that wasn't there. Billy heard the ruckus, but didn't see nobody else. Said them 2 was the only ones booked in that room." Joe turned to the kid. "Billy, see me. What did you see exactly?" Billy shuffled over, eyes wide. "Like Mr. Dawson said, sir. Heard yellin', went up, and found 'em bleedin' out. Didn't see no strangers, just them 2, sprawled with arrows stickin' out of their throats. But when we cleaned up after the sheriff hauled the bodies off, I counted 5 sets of dishes on the table, 5 plates, 5 forks. Mighty odd for 2 fellas." Joe's mind kicked into overdrive. 5 place settings, 2 dead, meant 3 more were in that room, and they'd hightailed it after the kill. "Good catch, kid," he said, clapping Billy's shoulder. "Luke, where'd you stash the bodies?" "Ijwang," Luke replied, meaning the county morgue, a ramshackle barn on the edge of town where they kept the dead till burial. "Let's move," Joe ordered, waving his deputies along. "I want to see 'em myself." The morgue was a grim affair, damp and reeking of rot. An old-timer, Pops Grady, shuffled out to meet them, his rheumy eyes squinting at Joe's badge. "Don't know nothin', Marshal," he croaked, bowing stiff as his joints allowed. "Just watch the place. Ain't seen no strangers pokin' round." Joe ignored him, kneeling by the two bodies laid out on rough planks. Both were roughneck types, beards, patched coats, the kind of men who'd rob a stagecoach and laugh about it. Sure enough, twin arrows had punched through their necks, blood long since dried. 4 in the room, at least, Joe muttered, piecing it together. 5 eat, 2 die, 3 run. Could be a falling out, split in the gold went sour. But where's the rest of it? He stood, brushing mud off his knees. "Luke, round up your boys and double-check this town. I'm headin' to the Black Sands gang. If anyone's seen these bastards, it's them." The Black Sands were Jericho's underbelly, a crew of thieves and cutthroats led by Sam Saddle Rollins, a wiry ex-train robber who'd clawed his way to the top after knifing his old boss in a turf war. They ran the shadows from Kansas to Colorado, and Joe knew they'd sniff out strangers with gold. At the gang's hideout, a derelict barn on the outskirts, Saddle greeted Joe with a greasy grin. "Well, if it ain't Marshal Baxter. What brings the law to my humble abode? Oughta warned me, I'd have cooked a roast." "Cut the bull, Rollins," Joe snapped. 5 strangers, packin' stolen gold and maybe some Marshal issue guns. "You seen 'em?" Saddle's grin didn't waver. 5, huh? Lemme ask my boys." He hollered for a lackey, a scar-faced thug named Tommy Four Eyes. "Check the flats, any new faces crossin' the line lately. Hustle up." Tommy nodded and bolted. Saddle turned back, all sugar. "Sit a spell, Joe. Have a drink while we wait." Joe glared. "Find 'em, and send word to the jail. I ain't here to sip your rot gut." He stormed out, leaving Saddle chuckling in the dust. Back at the county jail, Joe paced the sheriff's office, rain drumming the roof. Luke and the deputies huddled round, sifting clues that didn't add up. $50 found, 950 missing. 5 bandits, 3 loose. The gold was close, he could feel it, but the trail was colder than a winter grave, and 5 days ticked down on the president's clock. Night fell over Jericho Flats, the rain a steady roar against the jailhouse roof. Joe Baxter sat hunched over a rickety desk, a cold cup of coffee in hand, his deputies sprawled around the room swapping theories. Sheriff Luke Tanner fidgeted nearby, looking like a man waiting for a noose to tighten. The gold heist was a puzzle with too many missing pieces. 5 bandits, 2 dead, 3 on the run, and $950 still unaccounted for. Joe's gut screamed the loot was near, but the clock was bleeding time. 5 days left to deliver. A sharp rap at the door jolted them upright. It was Tommy Four Eyes, the Black Sands gang's scar-faced runner, soaked and grinning like a fox. "Got something for ya, Marshal," he panted. "Heard it from a fella down at the livery, morgues haunted. Them 2 dead bandits from the saloon? One's up and walkin', or so they say. Old Pops Grady's dead too, keeled over last night, scared stiff." Joe's eyes narrowed, a spark flickering in the gloom. "Haunted, huh? Keep talkin'." He slid a $5 bill across the desk, bribe money well spent. Tommy snatched it, grin widening. "Here's the meat of it. Some drifter dropped dead yesterday, fever they reckon, and got hauled to the morgue. Boys went to lay him out, found Pops flat on his back by the coffin, eyes bugged out like he'd seen the devil. Then they spotted one of them saloon corpses missin'. Folks are sayin' it's ghosts, whole town's spooked." Joe smirked, standing fast enough to tip his chair. "Ghosts don't steal bodies. Somebody's movin' 'em, and I'd bet my badge it's tied to that gold. Let's roll, boys." He grabbed his iron ruler, deputies scrambling after him as Luke trailed, muttering about curses. They rode out to the morgue, a sagging barn on the town's edge, its warped boards creaking in the wind. The scene was chaos preserved in mud. Pops Grady lay sprawled by a splintered coffin, his face twisted in a rictus of terror, dead as a doornail, heart likely given out. One bandit's body was still there, arrow wound stark in the lantern light, but the other was gone. A muddy trail led out the back, ending at a ditch 10 yards off where the second corpse lay, abandoned like trash. Luke's men fanned out, digging through the muck, while Joe crouched by Pops, piecing it together. Old man heard something, he mused aloud. Came to check, saw that body movin', not walkin', mind you, but bein' dragged. Too blind to see who, just enough to scare him dead. He straightened, scanning the barn. Whoever took it didn't get far, ditched it when they heard company comin'. Sloppy work. A deputy hollered from the coffin. Marshal, over here. He held up a scrap of cloth, small torn, but fine silk, not the rough cotton you'd expect in Jericho Flats. Joe snatched it, turning it in the light. Fancy stuff, he said, pocketing it. Ain't from no drifter's britches. Search every inch, might be more. They tore the place apart, but the silk was the lone prize. Joe stared at Pop's corpse, then the muddy ditch. Somebody's coverin' tracks, he growled. Killed them two at the saloon, then tried to yank this one out of sight. Gold's still here, I can smell it. He clapped Luke on the shoulder. Haul these bodies back to the jail, proper this time. I'm thinkin' on what we missed. Back at the jail, Joe nursed a fresh coffee, the silk scrap nagging at him. 5 bandits, 3 alive, gold hidden but close. Something clicked, a half-remembered detail from Luke's rundown. Tanner, he barked, that mission east of town, Jericho Mission. How many preachers, you say? Luke blinked, caught off guard. 3. Just 3 small outfit, 1 chapel and a couple rooms. We checked it, turned up nothin'. Joe's eyes lit up. 3, huh? Let's pay 'em a visit. Got a hunch. He grabbed his hat, deputies falling in line. The rain hadn't let up, but Joe didn't care. Horse hooves churned mud as they galloped 10 miles east of the mission. A squat adobe building hunched against the storm. A faded cross topped its roof, and inside, 3 preachers in drab robes shuffled out to meet them, faces sour as old milk. The head preacher, a wiry man with a bald pate, bowed stiffly. Peace, brothers. Sheriff Tanner was here days ago, asked us plenty. We're simple folk, tendin' our flock. Ain't seen no strangers. Luke nudged Joe. Told 'em my boss from Kansas City's here to pray, wants a word with the Lord. The preachers swapped glances, uneasy, but waved Joe toward the chapel. As you will, Marshal. Blessin's on ya. Joe stepped inside alone, the air thick with damp and candle wax. He knelt before a weathered wooden Christ on the wall, faking a prayer while his ears strained. Then, a whisper, faint as a ghost, from behind the statue. Careful, they're watchin'. Joe's head snapped up, heart pounding. He listened harder and it came again. Careful, shut it tight. Raspy, desperate, from the rafters above. He didn't hesitate. With a grunt, he hauled himself onto the statue's base, muttering, "Sorry, Jesus," and scrambled up to the beams. There, sprawled like a dying bird, was a man, thin, bloodied, barely breathing. Joe hissed, "Quiet now, I'll get you down." The trail was hot again. Joe Baxter clung to the rafters of the Jericho Mission Chapel, rain drumming the roof as he stared at the half-dead man sprawled before him. The fellow was a wreck, pale, blood-crusted, his breath shallow as a dying dog's. Joe whispered, "Hold on, partner," and signaled his deputies below with a sharp whistle. They stormed in, guns drawn, as Joe hauled the man down, laying him on the pews. The 3 preachers froze, their pious masks slipping as Sheriff Luke Tanner barked, "Nobody moves." The head preacher, bald and wiry, sputtered, "This is blasphemy. Before the Lord you dare." Joe cut him off with a cold stare. "Save it. Let's see who we've got here." He turned to the wounded man, who coughed up a name between gasps. Billy Ray. Black Sands. Joe's gut twisted, another cog in the machine. The deputies rounded up the preachers, and the truth came spilling out like whiskey from a busted barrel. Billy Ray was a lowlife from the Black Sands gang, a petty thief with big dreams. He'd tailed the gold convoy that fateful day, watching from the brush as 5 bandits ambushed the marshals. 2 of them, hardened killers, took the loot and holed up at the Dusty Rose Saloon, flaunting $50 of it. Billy Ray, greedy as sin, didn't join the party. He waited outside their window, planning to swipe the hall while they slept. But then the 3 preachers showed up, dressed in robes but packing steel. From his perch, Billy Ray saw it go down. 5 men feasting, arguing over the gold split. The preachers, imposters every one, pulled knives when the talk turned sour. 2 bandits went down fast, arrows through their throats, a trick to throw off the law, and the preachers rummaged for the stash. They didn't find it. Billy Ray had already snagged 2 gold coins through the cracked window, silent as a shadow. When the saloon kid Billy banged on the door, the preachers bolted, spotting Billy Ray in their escape. He ran, they chased, and a knife caught him in the back, spilling blood into the Cottonwood River. He swam off, barely alive, and tailed them back to the mission, hiding in the rafters to lick his wounds. The preachers spilled the rest, faces gray with defeat. The mastermind? Jericho Flats' own Judge Leonard "Len" Carver, Sheriff Luke's boss and the town's top dog. Len had botched flood control, drowning the county in debt, and knew Washington's gold was his last shot. He'd hired these 3 outlaws, killers posing as holy men, to hit the convoy, stash the loot, and lie low. They'd murdered the real mission preachers weeks back, taking their place, and hid the gold right under everyone's noses. The saloon pair were their muscle, but when they demanded a bigger cut, the preachers silenced them, only to lose Billy Ray in the chaos. Len had scrambled to cover tracks, sending his goons to snatch a body from the morgue for disposal. That's when old Pops Grady caught them, dying of fright as they dragged one corpse out, only to ditch it when a burial crew rolled up. The gold's hiding spot? They wouldn't say, claimed Len was still hunting it himself. Joe smirked, turning to the chapel's wooden Christ. Billy Ray's rasped warning, "Shut it tight," echoed in his head. He'd noticed the statue's left arm was off-kilter during his climb. "Luke, grab some muscle," Joe ordered. They rode back with a posse, the preachers in cuffs and Billy Ray clinging to life. Joe marched to the statue, twisted its arm hard, and with a groan, the back panel slid open. There it was, $950 in gold coins, glinting in the dim light, minus the 50 from the saloon and Billy Ray's too. The crowd gasped. Luke swore under his breath. "Son of a gun," he muttered. "Right in front of us." Joe's men stormed the jail next, nabbing Judge Len Carver mid-escape attempt, his fancy suit muddied from a failed run. The preacher killers, Len, and what was left of their scheme crumbled, locked up tight, awaiting trial. Billy Ray didn't make it, bled out before dawn, but his tip sealed the case. The gold went back to Washington, Jericho Flats got its relief, minus a few coins, and Joe Baxter rode out a hero. President Arthur pinned a medal on him, bumped him 3 ranks, and sent him to D.C. to head the Marshal Service, outranking the petty rival who'd saddled him with this mess in the first place. And that's the tale of the Jericho Flats gold heist, folks, greed, grit, and a statue that talked when it shouldn't. Hope you enjoyed it. Drop a holler below if you did, and stick round for more yarns from Nancy Miller. See y'all next time.